Hi everyone, my name's Annie and I'm going to be giving you a summary today of the session on growth mindset and resilience as part of the confidence development programme at Leeds Beckett University. So in the previous session you will have met my colleague Sam, and between the two of us we're going to be recording this video series together for you to catch up on any sessions that you might have missed, or any material you want to kind of go back over again and revisit. So in this session, we're covering the topics of growth mindset and resilience. So we're going to start with a bit of an introduction to the theory of mindset, particularly focusing on the concept of growth mindset, which was coined by a professor called Dweck. And we're going to be thinking how this impacts our everyday life, how our behaviour and the results we achieve are all related to the mindset, and the growth mindset can be impacted by growth mindset if we're implementing that in our daily lives. This might sound all theoretical so far, but we are going to be looking at some practical tips, some top tips to help influence and change your mindset as well. And we'll be thinking about those throughout the session. And linked to this topic of mindset are two concepts: the concept of self-talk and self-limiting beliefs. So these things can either hold us back or help us to develop, and are really quite linked to the mindset that we hold. So we're also going to be thinking about how we can listen to these voices and these beliefs, and again influence or change the way we respond to them to help the results that we're achieving. And finally, we'll be touching on the topics of grit and resilience. And I think resilience particularly is often used in a slightly detrimental way, but we're going to be trying to think about it in a positive light, in terms of how it can help to boost our confidence in terms of overcoming the challenges that we may face. So to kick us off, I am going to introduce you to the mindset thought loop. So I want you to imagine that you have been presented with an opportunity. So for example, very basic example, a maths test. And our mind then goes through this cycle, often entirely unconsciously. So if we start at the top there, in terms of the thought process, our thought process may be, oh, I'm not very good at maths. I'm not looking forward to this maths test. And the emotion because of that is perhaps going to be fear, uncertainty, anxiety, because this isn't something that we necessarily want to put ourselves through. And the belief is probably going to be that you're not going to do very well at this test. And as a result, our behaviour might perhaps look like avoiding the revision for this test, or not working very hard because there's other things that we enjoy more. There'll be distractions, barriers in place to us kind of putting that effort and that work in. And as a result, we're probably not going to do very well at that maths test. And so if we're faced with a similar situation again, this cycle is going to repeat based on the evidence of perhaps not performing very well in a previous test. The cycle is going to go through it again. These thoughts influence our beliefs and as such our behaviour, and impact the results. And this can be related to any situation. It might be something at university. It might be perhaps you're not particularly confident about public speaking. Or there might be another example that you can think of where you might have seen this thought loop playing out. And unless something happens to disrupt this cycle, our thought process is going to be the same time and time again. So this is called your self-talk, these thoughts that pop into our head and influence the behaviour and the results that take place. And we're going to be coming back to this concept of self-talk throughout the session. So what I want us to think about now is how we actually go about breaking that thought loop, and hopefully diverting our course to a different cycle where we can see different results. So it's about that self-talk that I mentioned. And the first thing is awareness. So being aware of those negative thoughts that are derailing our efforts. So again, if we go back to that maths test example, thinking right from the start, I'm not very good at maths. When you hear that come into your head, be aware of that thought. And that is a negative thought that is going to have the impact if we follow on with that thought loop. So instead, I want you to try and think about practicing more positive thinking. And this doesn't have to be saying I'm a maths genius, because that's not necessarily going to be the case for many of us. But if we think about things like, actually, if I try hard, I'm going to be able to change the way this turned out, or I'm going to be able to put the effort in to work and try my best at this maths test. So trying to switch up that thinking, having that awareness of the thoughts that are coming into our head. So the next step is listen. So when something does go wrong, when that result is not what you expected, listen to how you talk to yourself. Are you being kind and generous to yourself? Are you praising your efforts? Or are you berating yourself for not having put the time in, for not being very good at something, for failing? Those are also negative self talk that are not going to have a productive effect, and instead are going to send us back through that thought loop again. And finally, correct this self-talk. If you find yourself making these statements that are permanent or negative, correct those thoughts in your mind. Instead, try to think of something you can praise yourself for, something that you feel that you did well. Think about using your experience as a learning opportunity, and change those thoughts to break up that cycle. So as we're going through lots of the content today, I think a lot of it comes back to this kind of thing. So I want to bear this in mind, and if you can think of any examples, do start to try and implement these 3 steps in your daily lives. So the state of the world in the last couple of months has been quite frightening for many reasons. And even without a global pandemic, there's a lot going on in people's lives, especially whilst at university. People are often trying to juggle study, work, family responsibilities, hobbies, and a whole host of other things. And when presented with a complex set of circumstances like this, our amygdala is triggered. And this means that we make fear-based decisions. So this obviously isn't a good thing. And we're going to work through a number of topics today. And throughout the session, I want you to be thinking about what is reasonable and manageable, so that our fear doesn't get in the way of what we want to achieve. So I'm not expecting you to change the way you think in a day. That isn't reasonable and that isn't manageable. And will easily become overwhelmed if we're trying to achieve everything all at once. So instead, I want you to think about setting small goals, small steps that you can implement practically in your daily lives to step by step influence the way that you think, change up that thought loop, so that we're not making those kind of fear-based decisions. So it's the name of the session. But it's a concept you might not have come across before. So we're going to be thinking now about what is mindset. So mindset, a kind of definition, is a mental attitude that determines how you interpret and respond to situations. So if we think back to that thought loop, our mindset is going to determine how we respond and how we react when we're faced with different opportunities. And it's made up of lots of different elements. And the leading researcher in this field is Professor Carol Dweck, and we're going to be talking more about her in just a moment. You may have come across this term before, and if you haven't, not to worry. I want to direct you towards a short survey that you can do to kind of determine what kind of mindset you identify with, and that will be in the materials that we've sent out alongside these sessions. There's a link to that survey. So once you've had a look over this material, you may want to go away and have a look at that to help you reflect on your kind of personal approach and your personal mindset as well. So this is Professor Carol Dweck. She's a professor at Stanford University, so one of the leading universities in the world, and she developed the theory of mindset out of experiments with school-age children. So they were given puzzles, and once they completed them, they were asked if they wanted to do the same puzzle again, or if they would like a harder puzzle. And the research found that typically the children split into two camps. So those who wanted validation and praise for what they had achieved and didn't want to try anything harder in case they failed, and children who wanted to keep pushing and pushing themselves to do more difficult puzzles. So these two sets of children could be described as falling into these two sides of the mindset spectrum. So those who wanted to be praised for their achievements and didn't want to push themselves in case they failed could be described as having a fixed mindset. So they would typically say things like, I'm either good at it or I'm not, I don't like to be challenged, tend to be a bit worried about failure because they see that as a personal criticism of themselves. They want their achievements praised, and perhaps feel threatened by other people succeeding. They believe that abilities are kind of innate to yourself, something that you're kind of born with or you're not. Whereas those who wanted to push and challenge themselves would be described as having a growth mindset. So they believe that with effort, they can learn anything, they can put themselves to any task, and they want to challenge themselves. And actually, if they don't succeed, they see that failure as a learning opportunity and a way to move forward in the future. They're inspired by other people's success rather than threatened. And I think the key difference between these two, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, is that a fixed mindset, as I said, people believe that their abilities, their kind of innate talent determines everything, whereas with a growth mindset, it's their effort and their attitude that are going to make the difference. So obviously this example was about school-age children, but it's exactly the same for all of us as well. And I'm sure as I'm reading through those kind of lists, those definitions of the two types of mindset, you may be able to identify with some of those phrases. And it's a spectrum. So not all of us sit at the far end or the other far end. We may sit somewhere in the middle, and we also can move around on that scale depending on the situation, depending on different times and different experiences in our life. And critically, it's something that we can influence, which is what a lot of today's session is about. Thinking about that thought loop, thinking about breaking that cycle can help us to move to different places on this spectrum, depending on where we want to be. And I'm not saying that a growth mindset is entirely good and a fixed mindset is entirely bad. There are places for both of them. So what we're going to be focusing on today is the growth mindset, because I believe that particularly when we're thinking about confidence, there are real benefits there to adopting a growth mindset. But there are other scenarios where a fixed mindset may come into play as well. So to bring this theory to life a little bit, I want to present you with this, this statement. So how does growth and fixed mindset play out? So this statement actually comes from the survey, if you've done that already or thinking of doing it. And if I had you here in person, I would do a quick poll with you. But instead, I want you to decide whether you agree or disagree with this statement. So musical talent can be learnt by anyone. Do you agree? Yes, musical talent can be learnt by anyone, or no, it can't. And this is an interesting statement, as it often splits an audience in two. And we can broadly say, it's obviously only a rough guide, that those who say yes, it can be learnt by anybody tend to adopt more of a growth mindset. And those who say no, I think it's innate, it's something you're born with, tend to have more of a fixed mindset. And obviously there'll be many of us who fall in the middle, perhaps thinking something like, I think anybody can learn to play a musical instrument, but perhaps they won't be talented at it. Talent is still something maybe that you're born with. but there tend to be a few different groups of people who respond to this question. Now, thinking about your answer to this, I want to ask whether your answer would be different if instead I said singing. Singing talent at singing can be learnt by anybody. And we might find that more people move into the fixed mindset camp in terms of no, that's something that you're born with. And similarly, if actually maybe music is something that you're passionate about and you do believe is open to everybody, perhaps replace the musical talent with sport. Talent at sport can be learnt by anybody. And again, we might find slightly different answers there. So broadly, we can use these statements to kind of identify whether we fall on a growth or a fixed mindset end of the spectrum. But as you will have seen from those 3 different examples, we may change our minds, move along the spectrum depending on the situation. So it's an interesting one. Do ask it to your housemates, to your family, to your friends, your colleagues, see what responses they get, have a bit of a debate about where you might fall on that mindset spectrum based on statements like these. Now, a lot of this has been quite theoretical, so I want to give one example now of how to apply the mindset theory, and this is specifically relating to your job search, kind of post-university job hunt type thing. So if we're thinking about adopting a growth mindset when we're taking up, when we're starting out on this job hunt, when we're making our applications and attending interviews, the first thing to acknowledge is that writing applications, doing well in job processes is not a skill that anybody is born with. It's not an innate skill. It's something that can be developed and can be developed by anybody. And of course, a positive mental attitude is important, but that's got to be balanced with effort. So again, thinking between that growth and fixed mindset, people with a growth mindset tend to think that effort is key, whereas those with a fixed mindset think that it's ability that is key. But if we're saying it's a skill that has to be developed, then it's that effort that's really important to put in, and even if it's something you don't feel you're good at now, you can learn those skills and think about where to get the support to receive those skills. That's an important part of a growth mindset as well, seeking feedback, approaching your career services, asking a friend to read over your application. All these things can help you to develop those skills with practice to make excellent job applications. Employer research is really important when we're thinking about applying for jobs. And putting in the effort here will ultimately demonstrate emotional intelligence as well, which is something that lots of employers are looking for. And ultimately, if you are putting in the effort, putting in the practice, it takes practice, it's completely natural for it to take a few goes, you ultimately will achieve. You only need one to source one role, and the rejections are part of that process. They're entirely normal and entirely natural. And again, thinking about that growth mindset, we can treat them as a part of the learning process in terms of reaching that one role that we're going to go on and achieve. So I mentioned at the start the topic of self-talk and how we can use that self-talk to break up that thought loop. And we talked about self-talk in the context of failure, about how when we have a negative result, we might berate ourselves and say kind of negative things to ourselves. And so I wanted to remind you a little bit about what it can sound like before we move on to the topics of grit and resilience later on. So as I mentioned, in terms of in the context of failure, or when we're faced with a new opportunity, our negative self-talk might sound like, I've not done that before, so I can't do it, or I don't know what I'm doing. I'm no good at maths, we talked about earlier, or I'm no good at music or sport or public speaking. It's not going to work anyway, so there's no point putting the effort in. Those are some examples of what our negative self-talk might sound like, and you might recognise those in yourselves, or you might have other examples that you can think of. But on the other end of the scale, I want to think about our positive self-talk, how we can kind of flip some of those statements over. So instead of saying, I've not done that before, so I can't do it, or I failed before, so it's not going to go very well, you can think about actually saying to yourself, I'll make it work better this time. I will put in some time and effort to plan it out. I'll find support. I don't have to do this on my own. If I ask my friend who's really good in this area, or a lecturer, or a colleague, or housemate, I can find support to help myself practice and improve in this area. And this thing that might be a difficult barrier to get over might actually contribute towards a bigger goal. And we spoke in last week's session about goals and the importance of goal setting. But if we can if something we're finding a little bit difficult, if we can look at it in the kind of broader picture about how it fits in, how it contributes to that larger goal, it might give us the motivation we need to be kind to ourselves, to put that effort in and move forward. And instead of thinking that you have to do things or you need to do things, which is not a very kind of motivational way, it isn't going to give us that kind of get up and go. If we're thinking with positive self-talk, we instead can say, I choose to do this. I'm actively going to take this opportunity into my own hands and choose to go down this path. So again, I want you to think of an example. So this is a kind of exercise you can do with yourself at home, and you might want to pause the video while you do so. Last week we talked about your big career goals, but if you haven't got one from last week, I want you to think of an example of a goal that you've got, and I want you to take 60 seconds to say all the reasons why it's never going to happen. Might sound slightly odd, but bear with me. So for example, this is too hard. I tried previously and it didn't work. I've never done that before, so I can't go down that path. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm no good at it. So those are the kind of things you might be saying to yourself when you're putting yourself into this kind of negative self-talk mindset. And then, because I don't want to leave you on that note, I want you to switch it around and take another 30 seconds instead to say, to adopt this kind of positive self-talk and say all the reasons you are going to make it happen. So it's again thinking back to that growth mindset and that positive self-talk. I'm going to get support on this. I'm going to ask this person. If I practice, I'll get better. So even if it doesn't work the first time, that will help me to contribute to my longer term goals. Is a great opportunity for learning. I can plan it out and that will help me achieve it. And what else can I try? If that approach didn't work, where else can I look to make this happen? And hopefully you've had a chance to think through that career goal, that example in both of these different styles. And it's perhaps a fairly obvious question, but how did each of those make you feel? I know for myself, when I'm thinking through goals that I might have, certainly when I adopt this kind of negative self-talk, or when I find myself slipping into those thought patterns, it's in the name. It feels negative. It doesn't feel great. You lose motivation. You don't feel confident in yourself and your and the results that you want to achieve. Whereas when you start trying to implement these positive this kind of positive mindset, this positive self-talk, they can really help us to feel hopeful about the future and take small steps to gain that confidence and to move forward towards a goal that we've got. Now, I've spoken a lot about kind of positive self-talk and staying positive and talking to ourselves in a positive manner. But what I'm not saying, kind of by way of reassurance, is that mindset is not having a can-do positive attitude no matter what. There's going to be barriers that some people experience more than others that will affect our experiences and contribute to that thought loop in different conscious and unconscious ways. And we're not saying that positive thinking and a growth mindset will solve the patriarchy or institutional racism. Much more work needs to be done in these things. But this is a tool that we can use, a way of thinking that you can use personally when you're thinking about your own future. And as I said, there are positives to fixed mindset thinking sometimes too. So there are, you may want to look into those, but today, as I said, I want to think about using growth mindset as a tool in terms of boosting our confidence and thinking about our future. And just as in relation to kind of businesses, thinking about growing and developing. It's thinking about opportunities that we can grasp and take to learn and be better, practical tips that we can use. So I'm not saying have a positive attitude at all costs, but by thinking about some of these concepts can really help us to move forward and think about our future. So by way of a bit of a summary on mindset, remember that we start with that self-awareness. Listen to the self-talk, the voice in your head. How does it respond in certain situations? Can you work out what your self-limiting beliefs might be from these reactions and the way that you talk to yourself? So that might be something like, I'm not very good at maths, which is obviously an example we've used a few times now. Or that, you know, I'm never going to be any good at this thing, or I failed last time, so there's no point trying again. These are all self-limiting beliefs that are going to hold us back and keep us trapped in that thought loop. And thinking about kind of why these beliefs might have emerged. Is it a past experience? Is it something external to you? But having a bit of an idea about where they came from can be really helpful when we're moving on to the next step, which is challenging our thoughts. Think about some of those positive self-talk or growth mindset phrases if you're struggling with this one. What can I learn from my previous attempts? I can succeed if I ask for help. If I try again, it might turn out differently this time because I've learned from previously. Thinking back to that thought loop at the start, you can then start putting some of these new thoughts into action by developing new behaviours. And what will be the result of this? It might not be success every time, but it will certainly be more interesting. And it's important to think about stepping into the unknown and how we can use those failures to pick ourselves up and learn and gain the confidence to step in to that out of our comfort zone, to move forward and to break up that thought loop cycle. So before I leave you, I want to briefly introduce you to a few concepts around resilience. So what do you think of when you hear the word resilience? It may be something that's being kind of used to say that you're not very resilient, if you are struggling, if you're finding things difficult. But what I want to tell you today is that ultimately resilience is our ability to cope with or recover from change, loss, mistakes, adversity, or poor behaviour. We all demonstrate resilience throughout our lives. And actually, to the contrary, people who feel that they have had a really difficult time, have struggled, been through difficult circumstances, are probably the most resilient people. We all differ in how much strain we can handle, but contrary to popular belief, resilience is not something that you either have or you don't have. Again, like that kind of innate ability with a fixed mindset, it's something that we can learn and develop. We don't have a fixed level, and we can all become more resilient. And of course, there are links between resilience and personality. Some people will naturally have more self-belief or confidence or greater energy levels, or are more of a kind of glass half full. But there are things that we can do to improve our resilience. And so I want to leave you today by thinking about 3 top tips to improve your resilience. Lots of them overlap, but with kind of overlap with general tips for improving confidence. So treat this as a bit of a recap from last week's session. So the first tip is give advice, or more importantly, reflect on your own experiences and consider what kind of tools and techniques you've used to overcome adversity. If you're struggling to offer this advice to other people, offer this advice to yourself, think about how you might help a friend. Sometimes when things go wrong, you need to remember to have a word with yourself. Secondly, building positive self-image. So when discussing an issue that you might be thinking of, think about whether you're using any of these kind of phrases like always mess up, or it's my fault, or I can't do my job. And negative self-talk, self-thoughts and self-blame are going to hinder us, as you don't feel confident, you won't act confidently. So remember that content on self-talk. Negative self-talk will impact your resilience. So we need to nurture ourselves, help us to have feelings of competence to help us cope with stressful situations. And finally, a sense of purpose. So psychologists have found repeatedly that people with a strong sense of purpose experience more resilience and a stronger sense of well-being, and sometimes even better cognitive functions. So that takes us back to that goal setting we were thinking about last week. Thinking about a goal and setting that goal for ourselves can really help us to improve our resilience and to improve our confidence. So to end the session, a quote from Barack Obama: "Don't let your failures define you. Instead, you have to let your failures teach you." And I think that sums up really nicely that kind of concept of growth mindset. Things aren't always going to go right, and resilience is about how we bounce back, and adopting a growth mindset is how we learn from those experiences and use them to break up that thought loop and to move forward in a different direction. Thanks very much, everybody, and see you in the next video.